strange kind of dog's head-like projection. Probably some geological reality behind it. I don't know what it would be. At any rate, we find dog's head projections like this in paintings of the Yuan dynasty, maybe 14th century and so on. I went back after this painting was published and assembled a few of them and reproduced them for comparison in my article. Wang Meng, a painter of the time especially, seems to like this form. And they knew about 10th century paintings that we don't have anymore, except for this one chance survival on it from a tomb. Now then, as I explained in my published article, this newly discovered mid-10th century painting made me go back and look harder at a painting that we'd seen on our first Chinese delegation in 1973, but we hadn't paid much attention to it. But now, realizing its importance better, I was able to see it again and make slides from it on our second trip in 1977. And this was here. Here it is in a reproduction. Attributed to an artist named Wei Xian, 10th century artist, came from Chang'an, now present-day Xi'an, served in the southern Tang court under Li Hozhu, and is titled Gao Shi Tu, a noble scholar. And it's in the Palace Museum in Beijing. Well, it's much darker than this. This is a reproduction, and it's just vastly clearer than the real painting. And when we saw it, it was in a hand scroll case, because not strangely, it was a practice of the time. It was mounted in a hand scroll form. That is, you rolled it the other way, horizontally, top to bottom, really. Emperor Huizong and others apparently mounted important early paintings this way. So there it was in a case, and it was very dark, and we could scarcely see it, and we didn't really pay much attention. But now with the Liao tomb painting, I began to recognize the similarities and to go back to this, because this is another seemingly reliable 10th century painting. It's a small hanging scroll, but as I say, mounted as a hand scroll, and plausible as a genuine work by Wei Xian. Now this and 5 other paintings by Wei Xian are recorded in the Emperor Huizong's catalog, Xuanhe Huapu, early 12th century, all with the same title, Gao Shi Tu, the noble scholar. But one of my students at the time, named Jane Debevoise, I think I mentioned her before, wrote her master's thesis on this painting, arguing that the series might originally have been about notable women, since women figure strongly in each of the subjects. I can't argue that here. I don't have all of her argument in my head, but she or somebody should follow it up. Now, the subject is a Han period scholar named Liang Hong and his wife named Meng Guang. She revered him so much that when she served him food and drink, she would elevate it to a level of her eyebrows so as not to breathe upon it. Stories of virtuous women in China often don't match very well our ideas of distinction in women. They speak of subservience rather than real strength. But okay, that was Chinese. For China, she's a virtuous woman. So the composition generally, well, I'll show details again and then take you through the composition the same way. But generally, we enter it again between at the bottom, between trees and across a little stream, across water, to reach a bank and then a gate for the gate to his retirement home. And then we see an open pavilion with Liang Hong and his wife Meng Guang. She is serving him, so she is illustrating what she was famous for. And then beyond that, well, we'll see a fence and water, and then a great complicated landmass, which again you kind of move through and can look down into in strange ways, strange to Chinese painting. Nothing much like this happens later, but here it is. And then the main peak, which rises straight up, and then various writings and seals and all the rest of it of ownership. Okay, keep this on a series of details. Here's the lower part of it. Again, it's a painting with a series of interpenetrating spaces, spaces within spaces, spaces beyond spaces. The shaping of the rocks and the earth masses there as you see here in these garden racks, which he has set up outside his fence, are done with that same kind of shading, done with loose ink strokes, not with systems of repeated strokes, and various see-through effects. You see the fence beyond or through the open pavilion, swirling water beyond, and the peak with its dark ravine and swirling water at the bottom. It's all of that. You move across the water here at the very opening, which sort of separates the scene of the picture from you. It's not really presented as something you can enter into and move around in or anything like that. He is living in reclusion. The reclusion is indicated by the way the painting is composed, with him and his wife in their pavilion, set apart from all the around them. Trees, rugged, old trees, are not the sort of beautiful trees you find in Tong and earlier painting, as if the trees look like they have survived from a lot of wind and wear. Especially over here on the right, a tree with a kind of broken old trunk winding around. Anyway, quite a lot of that we'll see in other paintings. The next, please. Okay, and here is the above. Here is the two rocks or ornamental rocks that are set up in his garden outside the fence. And then you have a bamboo or whatever reed woven fence, and then you see the pavilion up above. Okay, here is the very center of the picture. The picture is arranged, that is, as a central space, in fact defined by the two figures facing each other in the traditional way, the man and his wife. And then that space kind of echoed by the space around them in the pavilion. And that in turn echoed by rocks and a fence here seen through the pavilion, and another one in the foreground, and then spaces beyond that with water, and then spaces, and so on. So you explore the painting in that way, all the interpenetrating spaces of the picture. Here are the two figures. It's not a great slide, but you see it, with her raising the tray up above, and he is seated at his desk, and he's reading a scroll, and he's looking very studious. Okay, so they are acting out their proper roles. This may, as I say, have been, according to his Srenhua catalog, it was one of a series of paintings that he did on this theme, of which one very happily happens to survive. And I think it very likely is the real thing. Okay, next. Now, then moving up beyond that, through the walls of through the open pavilion, we see a fence through which we can see water. And that water continues to the base of the main mountain. And here at the base of the main mountain is a kind of ravine, another overhanging landmass like the ones we saw in the Liao tomb painting. And we can seem to go back into that. And it's as though we can lean over and look down into these mysterious spaces. We explore, we explore, we explore. Here's the whole lower part of the mountain. In the next slide, please. And it's really very well worked out, because it invites you to move around the painting, looking into things, and seeming to show more and more as you move. More you look, the more you see, and so on. And the dark crevice, which continues up onto the peak. Here it is close up, with trees around it. The mountain forms quite powerfully shaped by strokes that are loose but have direction. That is, the direction of the ink strokes somewhat defines the direction your eye moves over the surface. That's a very important effect of this kind of painting. Later we will have, as I say, the development of texture stroke systems to serve the same function. But we'll often see dark clefts with waterfalls and such. The next. And here is still closer. Yes, here you can see the brushwork and the strokes. The contours not very much emphasized, rather soft, natural for the time, naturalistic painting, well-shaped forms, trees distinguished but not so unnaturally as they were in early painting. The next. And then here's the peak rising up straight beyond. Well, anyway, a very, very important painting. Now, as we'll see, this kind of landscape composition is not followed up in the decades and the centuries that follow. As we move into the early Sung period, artists of that time, that later time, seem to have had very different aims, and they pursue them into styles that give up much of what the five dynasties masters had achieved in pursuit of what they took to be deeper, more philosophical or more metaphysical goals. But before we go on to them, that will be in the next lecture, I'll show, to end this one more 10th century painting that exemplifies in its way this the more you look, the more you find kind of composition. And that is, the next please. Here, this is taken from a reproduction. This is a painting in the Shanghai Museum, and it's titled, for reasons you see, "A Flour Mill Powered by a Water Wheel Built Over a Canal Lock." Okay, that is what the painting is about, and we'll see all the details, the water wheel, the flour mill, and all the industry that has taken place around it. This is an extraordinary painting in the Shanghai Museum now. It's very dark. This is taken from a reproduction. If you can't see it, if you see the original, you can't see it as much as this. This is one of the two really great works of architectural painting with figures that are preserved in China. The other is the more famous Qingming Shanghetu, Spring Festival on the River, a Sung work of which I'll speak later, but I'm not going to talk about that one at length, as I will this one. Now, the Shanghai Museum people who showed us this when I first saw it in China told us that when they remounted it, they found an incomplete signature somewhere over here on the left edge. It was not the signature of Wei Xian, to whom this, I didn't say that, but this picture has been attributed to the same Wei Xian who painted the Gao Shi, the noble scholar, that we just looked at length. This signature was not Wei Xian at all, and that attribution can be forgotten. But it was Zhang something. They couldn't read the given name, Zhang blank. So it's essentially an anonymous work, probably of the, well, it's attributed to the 10th century, but more likely maybe, to the early Sung. Yeah, 10th century, but not five dynasties as much as early Sung. A young scholar named Hoping Liu, who teaches at Wellesley College, once my student at Yale, went on later to Yale for the PhD. He dates it convincingly to the early Sung period, probably the 970s to 980s, on the historical evidence from recorded information. The early Sung emperors sponsored water milling and the establishment of a water mill agency. And he published this an article in Art Bulletin for December 2002, which you can look at. At any rate, he's been working on scenes of commerce and industry, technology, in early Sung mainly. Anyway, he's done that very seriously, and I'm not going to follow up that aspect of the painting, all these historical and technological things that can be written about it. I'm simply going to talk about the style and the complex spatial systems and so on. This can also be used for writing about technology, the system of gears and the water wheel and all the rest of it. Joseph Needham and his great project for the science and civilization of China made much of this very properly. But all these things I won't do. Now I'm going to show a series of detailed slides, starting mainly up here in the upper left, where we see the manager of the whole operation sitting at his desk and meeting people and taking records and so on. And then I'll show a series of details of the main part here with the water wheel and up above the flour mill, grinding the flour. And then peasants are bringing, or farmers are bringing sacks of grain to the mill to be ground into flour. And they are arriving in boats and in wheelbarrows. In the foreground, you see a whole road here going across a bridge among the trees on the wheelbarrow. I mean wheelbarrows and ox carts. We see both of them in this painting. And then on the lower right, it's really very extraordinary, and I'll show slides of this. People who have made their money by selling the grain or whatever